Hey, Stewart Chapel, Don Pierson, Don Counts, and we're here at the church's office. And this is, let's see, what is September the 17th, Friday, September the 17th devotion as we look at Scripture in relationship to burdens. A few weeks ago on a Sunday morning, actually the last Sunday of August, I preached a message on between carrying your burdens and casting your burdens. And at that time, I went through some of the Greek words, the New Testament words that God chooses to use that are translated as burden or load or burdensome. I thought it might be helpful today, seeing how, especially on the section of Scripture we're going to be looking at, and some of the other devotions that are coming, to do a review for some of you, and for some of you this won't be a review. So I'm just going to walk through these scriptures, and then I'm going to take you over to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So some of the Greek words that are translated in English for burden or load or burdensome are gomos. Gomos is used in Acts. It's translated as cargo, wares, or burden. And it's used in the book of Acts for ships and that which they carry. It's not used in Scripture for individuals. It's used for things. So that makes sense. This ship is carrying a burden or a load or cargo. And so this is not the word when you think of burden that you think of. And so that one we get rid of, right? Okay. The other one is katanarkao, and katanarkao. It is to be often translated as burdensome, and you can see it's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 13 and 14, just like this katabato is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 16 in that same section. And that's where we're going to be going in just a minute. So let's look at these words that are translated the same as burdensome. Katanarkeo, to grow or to make someone to become mentally, physically, and or spiritually weak, lethargic, inactive, numb, or torpid. Paul, when we get to this section of Scripture, you'll see that Paul says that he did not want to do this. He did not want to be burdensome to them. He did not want to cause them to feel or to become mentally, physically, or spiritually lethargic, inactive, numb, or torpid because of their concern for him. That wasn't it wasn't his desire to become burdensome. This word is also translated in the same section of Scripture as burdensome. It is katabareo, to impose upon someone a burden or heavy weight. At first, I thought this is probably what the Scripture uses or what Jesus used to describe the Pharisees, but it's not. That's not the word he uses there. And so, this word, kata, bareo, it is from the next word, baros, which can be translated literally burden, weight, or load, a heaviness, a burden, a load, or weight. And Paul is saying here that he did not want to put that upon him. He didn't come to them or is writing to them to cause a burden to them, to put a heavier load on them than what they already had. Now, baros and phorchion will come up later in other devotions, and so I may have to come back to this chart, but baros means the word burden. Both of these are used in Galatians chapter 6. Both of these are used in chapter 6 of Galatians, and they're both different, very, very different. Phorchion means a burden that has a call, a burden that has a responsibility, a burden that has a mission, a burden that has an assignment or a task. So let's go to this section here for today. 2 Corinthians 12, 13 through 16, or I'll actually read through 17. Paul's finishing his second letter to the Corinthians, and he says, "For what is it in which you were inferior to other churches, except that I myself was not burdensome to you?" He says, if you had a problem, where you are different than the other churches that I ministered to, one is I was not burdensome to you. In other words, I went the extra mile with you to make sure that you didn't feel obligated to take care of my personal needs. But he says, forgive me for this wrong. In other words, he's saying, I should have done that. I should have, and that word there is this word. Think about it. Paul's saying, well, forgive me for this wrong. He's being very sarcastic, and he's saying, well, you know what? Maybe I should have done this. He's talking about the fact that while he was with them, he didn't make them pay for him or pay for him. Other Christians from other cities took care of his needs, and he did not, or he worked and took care of his needs. He did not have to do that. But he's saying very sarcastic, I guess I should have done this. I guess I should have made you mentally and physically weaker and lethargic and inactive, numb, just because you were trying to take care of me. Now, for the third time, I am ready to come to you, and I will not be this. I'm not going to do this to you. For I do not seek yours, but you. In other words, I'm not coming from what you can give me. I'm coming for you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. And he sees himself as a parent to them. Verse 15, and I will very gladly spend and be spent for your souls. Though the more abundantly I love you, the less I'm loved. Did you hear that? Though the more abundantly I love you, the more I sacrifice for you, the more I spend everything I can so that you are not burdened, the less I am loved. You ever felt like that? The more you gave, the less you're appreciated. The more you do, the less you're loved. Well, that's what Paul is saying. It is interesting. God writes that. He records that for us. Verse 16, he says, but be that as it may, I did not burden you. Now it's this word. I did not burden you. I did not impose on you a burden or heavy weight. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you by cunning. Did I take advantage of you by any of those whom I sent to you? The answer is no. The point of this lesson is that Paul, his intention was not to take from them, was not to deplete them, but to give. And he gave, he spent himself, literally, he gave himself, he sacrificed for them so that he would not do this. Though there's a lot of sarcasm in these verses, man, what a heart of a man to be able to say, you know what? You may not have given me any love. You may not have appreciated what I did. But you need to know that my heart's intention was for you, not for me. Sometimes carrying that intention is a burden for the one who carries an intention. You ever felt that way, been there? You're just trying your best to serve your employer, trying to serve your spouse. You do everything you can for your kids to make sure that none of this is there. But you find yourself being taken advantage of, being used and spent, unappreciated and unloved. Well, I want you to know something. Paul didn't quit. Paul didn't quit because of the way he was treated. He goes to the next place and he does the same thing. You see, that's the example of Christ towards you. Rarely is Christ appreciated by us. Our love is more in words than in deed. He spent himself And I'll tell you what, I think he'd do it again if he had to, but he doesn't have to, does he? How are you? Are you burdensome because of trying to not be a burdensome? Or are you on the receiving end where all you are is a taker and it's all about you instead of others? Do a heart check. Love you, Steers Chapel.